Associated with the underworld, the term Anunnaki often refers to deities in the broadest sense. The Anunnaki, the great gods, have taken up dwellings in your midst, and consume their food in your Giguna shrines with their single tree. When researcher Hermel Hermstein embarked on his quest to find the real origins of the Sumerian people, there was one piece of evidence which clarified without a shadow of a doubt who the Sumerians were. It was the collection of cranium from early to mid-Mesopotamian periods. Their analysis showed consistency with other anthropological evidence, and Hermstein related to us that, quote, Neolithic West Asia had a similar population to pre-dynastic Upper Egypt. The cuneiform tablets were first translated by Assyriologist Sir Henry Rawlinson. The breakthrough came when they realized that cuneiform, the writing system found on the tablets in ancient Mesopotamia, represent two distinct languages, Sumerian and Akkadian. And this discovery, paired with the true origins of the Sumerian language, enabled Rawlinson to crack the cuneiform code. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero Gilgamesh leads the spirit of his friend Enkidu in the underworld, where the Anunnaki act as judges and lawmakers. In Tablet 8 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it reads, Gilgamesh laments 7 days and 7 nights. He wept for his friend Enkidu, until the worm fastened on him. Only then he gave him up to the earth. For the Anunnaki, the judges had seized him. It is through this timeless epic of an unlikely brotherhood that the ancients impart unto us the most important lessons of life. And in so doing, they reveal to us how we came to be. But most important of all, they tell us who they really are, and how they came to create the civilizations on the fertile lands of the Tigris and Euphrates. In the Tablet 5 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the humans of the land saw what had become of Enkidu, Gilgamesh's brother-in-arms, he who was previously unclothed, savage, and uncivilized, when they saw Enkidu, they proclaimed, How is he become like Gilgamesh suddenly? In form, he is shorter. In other attributes, he is made powerful. Milk of the cattle he drank. This revealing verse indicates to us that Gilgamesh, the hero and demigod who walked and interacted with the gods, and who also had their favor, Gilgamesh was in the likeness of the Anunnaki, tall, powerful, and knowledgeable of things that were beyond those of the people of the land. But even more telling is the verse of the description of Gilgamesh's hair, when he had remained in the wild for too long, and it tells us Gilgamesh's true origin. After his exile in the wild, our demigod, Gilgamesh, is described as follows. Gilgamesh, in the plain, his hair growing thickly like the corn. Now, who do you know that has hair that grows like corn when untreated? You guessed it, black Africans. Remember Sir Henry Rawlinson, who deciphered the cuneiform scripts? Rawlinson also revealed that the Sumerians were the original Scythic and Turanian people he called Kushites. But this fact was suppressed by following influential Assyriologists like Oppert. It is only in recent years, with the re-examination of Rawlinson's original work and the added perspectives of genetic findings, linguistic studies, and analysis of cranial remains, that we can now identify with confidence the true origin of the early Mesopotamian civilization. The true originators of the Epic of Gilgamesh were black Africans who migrated from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex. And the story of the epic fits perfectly with the historical facts that a people, a tall and all-knowing people, with powers beyond those of the land in Mesopotamia, came and brought civilization. Both in their deeds, their possessions, and their form, they were seen as gods, and they would have been. So, who are those Anunnaki that they speak of? None other than the tall black African stock from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex, coming to Mesopotamia as colonists, bringing their civilization and culture with them. And who were the locals of Mesopotamia? They would have been the Negritos, the descendants of the black Natufians who had lived in that area for millennia, and had remained black from 10,000 BC to 2500 BC as the historical record shows. When the epic relates to us that Enkidu, after his transformation as a civilized man, drank milk of the cattle, we recognize here the pastoral tradition of the Eastern African nations, a tradition that started in the Western Sahara when it was still green and lush prior to 6000 BC and before these Africans migrated to the Nile Valley. And his new godlike status is confirmed a few verses later when the epic continues. Continually in the midst of Eric weapons, the heroes purified, a project was instituted. Unto the hero whose countenance was turned away, unto Gilgamesh like a god, he became for him a fellow. Here again, the motifs of the creation are repeated. 6 days and 7 nights. 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, to give Enkidu, the savage local, the knowledge of the gods, the education of the initiates, and when he is ready, they will lead him to no other place than the dwelling place of Anu. Well, this is interesting because Anu is the chief ancient deity of Nubio-Kemet, who existed there a millennia before they show up in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Regarding the Anu in Nubio-Kemet, ancient Egypt, the term more commonly refers to a group of early settlers in the Nile Valley. Recent discoveries like the Terranetter tile from Abydos show that the Anu were foundational to the development of the Nile Valley culture and, by extension, the entire Kemetic civilization. This civilization is believed to have begun the Neolithic Revolution in Africa around 3400 BCE, predating and setting the stage for Egypt's first dynasty under Narmer. The Anu are credited with significant contributions to Egyptian culture, including advancements in agriculture, funerary practices, and the hieroglyphic writing system, among others. So the Neolithic culture that started with the Natufians in 10,000 BC, which then migrated to Western Sahara and continued developing until the desertification in 6000 BC, that same culture then migrated east again, towards the Nile, in search of the right conditions to continue their civilization. And the Nile offered it, and from there they would re-civilize the Levant. The archaeological and genetic record attest to that migration, which aligns with the text from the Mesopotamian epics. Enkidu received further civilizing elements from Gilgamesh and his mother, and the epic reads, "She tore off one garment and clothed him with it. With a second garment she clothed herself." And the text continues so as to emphasize the ignorance of Enkidu. So savage he was that he did not know what bread and beer were. Food they placed before him. He broke bread, gazing and looking. But Enkidu understood not. Bread to eat, beer to drink, he had not been taught. The Hierodule opened her mouth and said unto Enkidu, "Eat bread, O Enkidu. It is the conformity of life, of the conditions and the fate of the land." Enkidu ate bread until he was satisfied. Bread and beer are extremely sophisticated foods to the uninitiate. They require complex societies that possess specializations from agriculture to yeast culture and storage industry, and everything in between. So when the African colonists showed up with their superfood, their liquor that can make you drunk, and their science, They were de facto assigned the title of gods, and their Dinka-like height made them giants amongst the short Negritos. The Dinka people of Sudan, in the heart of ancient Egypt, are the tallest people in the world. The average height of the Dinka today is 6 feet, and in ancient times would have definitely been higher. But there is one more telling piece of evidence that the ancient Mesopotamian left to help us identify them. In the Sumerian epic, the Anunnaki had commanded the people of the land, the Igigi, to work on irrigation projects that would help make the land fertile. Specifically, canal irrigation. In their 2020 research paper on ancient hydro techniques, Dr. Gohari and Dr. Angelakis showed that, quote, dams and canals were constructed in ancient Egypt to manage the flood of the Nile River and develop irrigation systems from 6000 BC. End quote. And this is before the irrigation techniques show up and start to be popularized in the areas of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Yet another data point that shows that the Africans from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization brought their technology and know-how with them to the Mesopotamian region. The ancient city of Kish was occupied from at least as early as 3200 BC through the 7th century AD, located on the floodplain of the Euphrates River, 80 kilometers south of modern Baghdad. Kish held an extraordinary position during the formative periods of Mesopotamian history. At that time, it seems to have been the only important city in the northern part of the alluvium, while there were several major centers in the south. The ancient Mesopotamians regarded Kish as the first city to which kingship descended from heaven after the great flood that had destroyed the world. During the 3rd millennium BC, rule over Kish implied dominance over the entire northern part of the plain, and the title King of Kish bestowed prestige analogous to that of the medieval Holy Roman Emperor. The British Museum of Natural History holds the largest collection of Kish remains. These were analyzed and classified by anthropologist Faris Supia using Fordisk 2.0 to determine the affinities of the individuals and the population as a whole. Fordisk 2.0, the forensic discriminant program, enables precise classification of the ethnic origin given a cranial sample. And the forensic analysis of cranial remains in Kish shows that they were Black African, as this chart shows. Notice here that the reading of Egyptian refers to the Nubio-Kemetic stocks, which we have already seen is indistinguishable from Africans living south of the Sahara. Same goes for other non-Eurasian classifications that are directly attributable to Africans. Furthermore, consistent with the previous data, the presence of non-African stock starts to increase only in the late period. This shows that just like in the ancient Nubio-Kemet, millennia after the Africans had established the civilization, along with all its defining elements, surrounding people not only started to immigrate to Kish and the rest of Mesopotamia, but invaders also brought in new people who over centuries inherited the science, culture, and land of the Kishites, Babylonians, and Akkadians. This confirms again the Black origin of early Mesopotamia. These supreme beings that arrived in the land that instituted advanced agriculture techniques, including canal building and a new way of recording information, writing, these newcomers were Black African. Let's see what pieces of evidence in the Sumerian epic help us confirm this fact. One of the most misunderstood themes of the epic and the story of the Anunnaki is the confirmation of their humanity through various aspects. The first being the elevation of Enkidu to the status of Anunnaki. Not because of the transformation of his physical form, but because of what he does and because of what he knows. The eating of the bread from the harlot, a symbolism of the fact that he has not only acquired knowledge, but has also consumed the forbidden fruit from the woman. And we see it again when he helped the people of the land. He put on some clothing and became like a warrior. He took up his weapon and chased lions so that the shepherds could eat. He routed the wolves and chased the lions. With Enkidu as their guard, the herders could lie down. A wakeful man, a singular youth, he was twice as tall as normal men. This is again revisited in Tablet 2 when Enkidu loses his recently acquired status of God, and again through deeds and not through being or physical mutation. In his research, Dr. Kiatezua has shown that TAR, traditional African religions, are an exact science. Unlike Western religious system, TAR systematically encoded scientific knowledge into its religious systems. In Kemet deities, such as Ra and Anu and others embodied various aspects of space-time, advanced mathematics, the cosmos, and other elements of our solar system and creation. TAR even implements the duopoly of fundamental elements that come in pairs like the proton and the electron, by having gods in Kemet that come in pairs, male and female counterparts. TAR encoded the cardinal points of the Earth and its dimensions into the pyramids. It also encodes the various observable celestial constellations by aligning its monument to their precession in their 26,000-year cycle in the night sky. Its mathematics and science were closely guarded secrets of the initiates who happened to be priests, but exposed as mysticism, as magic, to the uninitiated. This traditional African religion is much older than Kemet and can be found in almost all African religious systems of the past and present. Today, we find it with the warrior class in Burkina Faso and their tradition of invincible warriors. We find it with shaman priests who perform tricks of levitation or resistance to fire. Here, the initiates are displaying their knowledge of physics and material science. But perhaps its most popular representation is with the Dogon people of Mali, themselves descendants of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization, complete with Egyptian hieroglyphs, whose priest class had retained astronomical knowledge so advanced that it took us until the 20th century to validate many of the knowledge that they had encoded in their religion. So, the Sumerian epic, itself interpreted by many as a celestial creation myth of our solar system and the creation of man, is thus a member of the traditional African religion, complete with its astrophysical account of the birthing of Earth and the allegorical accounts of the evolution of man into a civilized organism, well in possession of a social contract. Just like in Tar, traditional African religion, our heroes, Enkidu and Gilgamesh, encounter a great evil which they must fight. Humbaba, also known as Huwawa, is depicted as the guardian of the cedar forest, appointed by the god Enlil. Portrayed as an ogre, giant, or demon, Humbaba becomes a significant adversary for Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu during their quest to the forest. Gilgamesh arose and went to her. Ninsun, even though I am extraordinarily strong, I must now travel a long way to where Humbaba is. I must face fighting, such as I have not known, and I must travel on a road that I do not know. Until the time that I go and return, until I reach the cedar forest, until I kill Humbaba the Terrible, and eradicate from the land something baneful that Shamash hates. Intercede with Shamash on my behalf. If I kill Humbaba and cut his cedar, let there be rejoicing all over the land. These are also reminiscent of the countless stories across the continent, akin to the story of Ananse with the Ashanti, where the half-spider, half-human trickster is entrusted by God to distribute intelligence to man. But his role as a villain serves the purpose of helping humanity find its center. He wields great power, striking fear into the hearts of many, and stories of his fearsomeness paired with the Uruk elders' alarm succeeds in characterizing Humbaba as a worthy adversary even before we meet him. Killing Humbaba to Gilgamesh appears to be less about granting his people access to the forest and more about proving himself with a feat of strength for which he would be celebrated. However, it's also notable that he and Enkidu are doing the work of the sun, god Shamash. That Shamash, who is linked with light and wisdom, opposes Humbaba, further aligns the guardian with darkness and evil. He is also chosen by Enlil, the god who brought the flood and bears little empathy for humanity. The appellation of the god Shamash, itself reminiscent of the word Shems in Arabic, which signifies the sun. Here again, the Nubio-Kemetic motifs are present, taking us back to the sun god Ra. Surprisingly, Humbaba, though a demon, is not entirely without humanity of his own. Once defeated, he begs for his life, and he even says he'll become Gilgamesh's servant if he is spared. Urged by Enkidu, however, Gilgamesh forgoes mercy. Humbaba suggests Enkidu is jealous, fearful that he, Humbaba, would replace him as Gilgamesh's closest companion, offering a surprisingly shrewd insight into the relationship between the two warriors. Similarly astute is Humbaba's prediction that killing him and angering Enlil will bring a curse upon them. This, combined with Enkidu's rather audacious assumption that they can kill Humbaba before Enlil finds out, and thus avoid his wrath, foreshadows a coming disaster brought about by their hubris. Enkidu made a declaration to Gilgamesh. In order to protect the cedar forest, Enlil assigned Humbaba as a terror to human beings. Humbaba's roar is a flood, his mouth is fire, and his breath is death. He can hear 100 leagues away any rustling in his forest. Who would go down into his forest? Enlil assigned him as a terror to human beings, and whoever goes down into his forest, paralysis will strike. Our heroes make their way towards the forest where Humbaba lives. They climb the mountains, separating them from the forest, but have to rest atop it for the night. Enkidu has a dream, a premonition that his friend Gilgamesh interprets for him. Enkidu interpreted the dream for his friend. "My friend, your dream is favorable. The dream is extremely important. My friend, the mountain which you saw in the dream is Humbaba. It means we will capture Humbaba and kill him and throw his corpse into the wasteland. In the morning, there will be a favorable message from Shamash." As they get ready to engage the monstrous Humbaba, the tablet proclaims, "A slippery path is not feared by two people who help each other." This lesson, that Africans of the diaspora have forgotten because of the crime of colonization. This lesson is written on tablets from our ancestors, and we must heed its calling. That united, no threat can stand before us. That united, no Humbaba is stronger than us. And now, the time has arrived. The tall African, Gilgamesh, bringer of technology, and his civilized Negrito friend, Enkidu, have now arrived at the hour of their destiny. They are now to face Humbaba. The one who watches from the side is a careful man, but the one who walks in front protects himself and saves his comrade, and through their fighting, they establish fame. As the two of them reached the evergreen forest, they cut off their talk and stood still. The Underworld, that mythical place where the Anunnaki live, is the same place where many African gods live. In Tar, traditional African religion, there is a deification of the patriarch and the influential figure. You can see it with Imhotep, you can see it with Khufu. But you can also see it with the libation practices that have survived in Africa till today. A practice where precious liquor is poured on the ground while giving thanks to the ancestor. Over generations, key influential figures are elevated to the status of deity, but they still reside underground, in the underworld. It is not the dark or hellish underworld of Western society, but rather a place of peace where those respected humans dwell. Those humans who, in time, will be promoted to the rank of gods, to the rank of Anu, the Anunnaki proper, and a place from which those ancestors continue to provide wisdom, those who are still going through the test of life. Here, the allegory of the acquisition of knowledge is imparted unto us by the ancients. It is not just unity, but it is also knowledge and wisdom that will defeat Humbaba. This is why Enkidu had to be civilized. This is why, via learning the ways of the Anunnaki, Enkidu himself becomes strong. As they stand together facing the Humbaba, the treacherous being addresses them, and the tablet continues. Humbaba spoke to Gilgamesh, saying, "An idiot and a moron should give advice to each other, but you, Gilgamesh, why have you come to me? When you were still young, I saw you but did not go over to you. And now you have brought Gilgamesh into my presence. You stand as an enemy, as a stranger. I would feed your flesh to the screeching vulture, the eagle, and the vulture." And so the battle begins. Pay close attention to the language used here. You will notice that it is not the language of a clash of men, but rather that of a major geological event. The ground split open with the heels of their feet as they whirled around in circles, meant Hermon and Lebanon split. The white clouds darkened, death rained down on them like fog. Shamash raised up against Humbaba mighty tempests. South wind, north wind, east wind, west wind, whistling wind, piercing wind, blizzard, bad wind, wind of Simuru, demon wind, ice wind, storm, sandstorm. 13 winds rose up against him and covered Humbaba's face. He could nor butt through the front and could not scramble out the back. And yet still the mighty Humbaba could not withstand the might of the united friends, and is now at the mercy of our African hero. So that Gilgamesh's weapons were in reach of Humbaba. Humbaba begged for his life, saying to Gilgamesh, "O scion of the heart of Uruk, King Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, let me go. I will dwell with you as your servant." They hurried themselves to slay Humbaba before the gods intervened on his behalf. Having excelled in the challenge presented to them by the gods, our heroes now find themselves at the disfavor of the gods. The Anunnaki now realize that united Enkidu and Gilgamesh, the crafty Bushman, and the tall Nubian are a powerful force, and now they fear. My friend, why are the great gods in conference? In my dream, Anu, Enlil, and Shamash held a council, and Anu spoke to Enlil. Because they killed the bull of heaven, and have also slain Humbaba, the one of them who pulled up the cedar of the mountain must die. Enlil said, "Let Enkidu die, but Gilgamesh must not die." The Anunnaki had sealed the fate of Gilgamesh's friend, the fate of his now brother, in knowledge and power, Enkidu. Then Enkidu said, "So now must one become a ghost, to sit with the ghosts of the dead, to see my dear brother nevermore." Gilgamesh listened to the words of Enkidu, his friend, and his tears flowed. But before his last hour, Enkidu curses the very woman that brought him the forbidden fruit of knowledge. And in his speech, we find the conundrum of man, that he who becomes knowledgeable, he who acquires intelligence and consciousness, this being is now condemned to also be aware that one day he will come to pass, a realization that he did not have before becoming fully human. And this theme is also revisited in the story of the Garden of Eden, when Adam, after having eaten the fruit, is now aware of his nakedness, meaning he is now self-aware. It is with this realization, having now transitioned to the status of God, to the status of Anu, that Enkidu now cries for his fate and curses the goddess that brought him forth. "Come now, Shamhat the harlot, I am going to decree your fate, a fate that will never come to an end for eternity. I will curse you with a great curse. May you not be able to make a household. May you never acquire anything of bright alabaster. May shining silver, man's delight, not be cast into your house. May a wasteland be your sleeping place." This curse is that of the formation of the asteroid belt, never to bear life and forever doomed to the wasteland, a punishment suitable for any celestial body that has destroyed another. Upon hearing the curse of Enkidu, the African god Shamash reminds Enkidu that it was Shamhat that gave him the bread of knowledge, that clothed him, and that gave him his brother friend Gilgamesh. And it is upon hearing these words that Enkidu's heart calmed. Here, our hero realized that, even with the drawback of now being aware that his fate is sealed, that life with consciousness is a gift, even if it is finite. So, as a true hero and true civilized Anu, he now makes the best of the little time that he has left and reverses the curse he had ushered. "Come, Shamhat, I will decree your fate for you. Let my mouth which has cursed you now turn to bless you. May governors and nobles love you. May he who is 1 league away bite his lip in anticipation of you. May he who is 2 leagues away shake his locks in preparation." Here again, the ancient confirm their own identity by identifying themselves by their hair, their locks, and with this last good deed, the brothers in quest were thus separated. It is not until Tablet 11 of the epic that we get the story of the Great Flood sent by Enlil. Where else do we find the story of the Great Flood in ancient times? We find it in Egypt. When Gilgamesh was ordered to build the ark, this is how he described it. "On the 5th day, I laid out her exterior. It was a field in area, its walls were each 10 times 12 cubits in height, the sides of its top were of equal length, 10 times 8 cubits each. I laid out its interior structure and drew a picture of it. I provided it with 6 decks, thus dividing it into 7 levels. The inside of it I divided into 9 compartments. Of interest here is the unit of measure, the cubit. If you have seen our episode 12 on the origins of mathematics, then you know that the cubit is a unit of measure that originated from the Africans in Kemet. But because Sumer was a colony of Kemet, one should not be surprised to find the same unit of measurements here too. In fact, ancient Mesopotamian units of measurement originated in the loosely organized city-states of early dynastic Sumer. Each city, kingdom, and trade guild had its own standards until the formation of the Akkadian Empire, when Sargon of Akkad issued a common standard. This standard was improved by Naram Sin, but fell into disuse after the Akkadian Empire dissolved. The standard of Naram Sin was readopted in the Ur III period by the Nanshe hymn, which reduced a plethora of multiple standards to a few agreed-upon common groupings. Successors to Sumerian civilization, including the Babylonians, Assyrians, and Persians, continued to use these groupings. Both Naram Sin and Sargon of Akkad were phenotypically black. The victory stele of Naram Sin, which dates back to 2250 BC, depicts the conqueror king and the people of Zagreb, whom he conquered as black people, sporting typical afros, luscious lips, and long limbs proportions. Yet another one of those rarely shared archaeological gem. Utnapishtim continues by saying, I gave the workmen ale, beer, oil, and wine, as if it were river water, so they could make a party like the New Year's festival. And I set my hand to the oiling. The boat was finished by sunset. The launching was very difficult. They had to keep carrying a runway of poles front to back, until 2/3 of it had gone into the water. Whatever I had, I loaded on it. Whatever silver I had, I loaded on it. Whatever gold I had, I loaded on it. All the living beings that I had, I loaded on it. I had all my kith and kin go up into the boat. All the beasts and animals of the field and the craftsmen I had go up. Here, we see that, unlike the biblical version of the story, Utnapishtim was assisted by many workers to complete the ark. Most are also not aware that Kemet had a flood myth older than that of Mesopotamia. Like the Mesopotamian and Genesis flood stories, the Egyptian flood myth begins with the anger of the high god against the ungrateful evil of the human race. A late 3rd millennium BCE myth tells how humanity had gone so far as to plot against Ra himself, and that Ra called the gods into council to decide what to do with these children of his eye. Humans had been born of the tears of his eye, represented by a goddess. In this case, the eye is Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, perhaps as the fiery sun, who, bent on the destruction of her miscreant children, descends upon humans and their world, and unleashes all of her violent fury on them. The destruction is so terrible that Ra relents and decides he must put a stop to the terror wrought by his eye. He creates beer from barley and red ochre and floods all of the fields of Egypt with it. Sekhmet is herself attracted by the beer and drinks so much of it that she becomes intoxicated and forgets about her destructive mission. A few humans are thus saved and are able to begin a new life. But beyond the myths, is there any evidence supporting the narrative of a flood? Yes. Meltwater Pulse 1b. So 11,500 years ago, this sudden rise in sea levels all over the globe, and this happened right after the mini ice age of the Younger Dryas. This means that any semblance of civilization that would have sought shelter from the frigid temperature by living next to the coastlines would have been immediately destroyed by this sudden and violent seawater rise. For more than a century now, the story of Mesopotamia has, like many historical narratives, excluded the very people who wrote it. This purposeful alienation of the black African by Assyriologists like Oppert, even in the face of multifaceted evidence, has caused whole generations to believe a fairy tale of Levantine or Nordic early dynastic Sumer. And the same tactics have been applied. popularization of artifacts that depict Sumer in a light unfavorable to the black man, while simultaneously suppressing true Sumerian history. In so doing, they have managed to reappropriate the contribution of the African to seminal inventions like the wheel, our modern way of telling time, the sailboat, astronomy, and chariots. Though allegorical, the Sumerian epics are above all stories of creation and stories of the human condition, stories that are rooted in the African tradition and that are meant to guide us. And when taken into context, the whole Mesopotamian chapter is but a continuation of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization, a continuation of the African story, one that we must listen to, not to mimic, but to help us build a better Sumer, a better Africa, one whose borders now extend all the way across the Atlantic. And it is the lesson of the brotherhood of Enkidu and Gilgamesh that we must heed as a call to action. A reminder that no matter our appearance, short or tall, light, dark, or darker skin, it is through the acquisition of knowledge that we will become gods. It is knowledge that makes us Anunnaki,